Hello, welcome to IERLab Podcast. Now, who are we? Now, IERLab is the Influencer Ethnography Research Lab located at Curtin University in Perth, Western Australia. Now, what do? We specialize in the methodologies and the pedagogies of influencer research. I'm your host, Walter Lee, coming to you all the way from Seoul, South Korea to bring you, our listeners, a more in-depth look on what's going on in the world of influencer cultures. Our series will feature researchers, scholars, and students of influencer culture. Today, we will be focusing on Chinese influencers, or Wang Hong, specifically in Mukbang contents, and how it differs from the rest of the world. Today's guest has a PhD in Media and Communication Studies from Monash University. She looks into studies such as online popular cultures, focusing on mukbang and ASMR, in order to get a more detailed analysis of the contemporary society in terms of social media's socio-economic and psychosexual implications. Her speciality is in the digital ethnographic research or psychoanalytic feminism, and is particularly interested in Chinese governmental of industry, hyperconsumerism, and lateral surveillance. Welcome to the show, Sophia.
Hi, thank you.
It's lovely to have you. It's lovely to have you here. Actually, you studied at Monash University, right?
Yes, I have.
I actually grew up in Monash a little bit, so I know the area.
Really?
Yeah, I
Oh,
spent
wow.
about 3 years in, well, this is a long time ago, of course, but I went to Monash Primary School and, yeah.
Wow.
But Sophia, I'm really happy to have you on our show today because I was so unaware how different China is from the rest of the world in regards to social media content and influences as well. I am, I'm on social media every day. I hate it, but it's part of it's part of my job and I have to be on there. But to me, obviously apart from the cultural differences, I see a lot of the content that I feel is very similar in many ways. I was fascinated to read your journal titled Mukbang Streamers in China. Now, am I pronouncing this right? Is it Wang Hong?
Yes, Wang
Yeah.
Hong.
Wang Hong as industry, labor, and exemplar of social transformation. Now, for those who don't know, Wang Hong means, is it internet influencers in China specifically, right?
Yes.
Okay, so can you explain for the listeners the difference between Wang Hong and an internet influencer, let's say in Australia, where you're studying? As in this journal, it cited that the labor laws and rights do not protect workers since they are considered subcontractors rather than employees. And in your piece on commercializing potential as critical factor on differential media management, a cultural zoning study of Chinese regulation of mukbang and online eating disorder communities, where these influencers have to uphold the party's socialist legacies. So am I right to say they aren't freelancers like I would assume most are, or it seems like they're currently under quite heavy restrictions?
Yeah. Well, first of all, just as I listening to you reading out the titles of my articles and my bio, I realized there are such mouthfuls.
Yeah, maybe
Um,
make it a little bit shorter.
yeah, a little bit shorter, a little bit easier to read out loud. Okay, to your question.
Mhm,
So first of all, I absolutely love that you've used the word free,
mhm.
or at least half of the word is free.
Yes.
So, well, China definitely has its unique political economic context that is different from, say, Australia or like Korea,
Mm,
where I think you are free to sell your labor.
mhm,
Although that's about it. I mean, you are also free to starve, but are you though?
mhm,
Yeah. So now when we talk about labor in the Chinese context,
mm,
we have to take into consideration the impacts of recent land reforms and labor reforms on the working class,
mm,
especially those from rural areas. They're
mm,
not just labor, but labor that is separated from
mm,
their traditional mode of production,
mm,
and who therefore they're not free to sell their labor. They must sell their labor and
mhm,
for cheap. So
Ah.
this, I believe, is the condition and the fuel really that propels
Mm.
China's live streaming industry.
Mm.
So that's my first point. And the second point, I think your second point is on influencers' role in upholding China's cultural, or I think that's my point. You were,
Yeah. It was your point that
yeah,
you made that I repeated, yes.
yes, in upholding China's cultural ideological images, or yeah. So I think to understand that argument, we must also first understand the dual role of China's internet industry, not
Mm.
just influencer industry or mukbang influencer. So I think this is perhaps one of the most unique, because you talked a lot about how you realize that China is so different.
Mm.
But I think to me, this is one of the most unique characteristics of China's internet culture,
Mm.
or if you want to call it cultural and creative industry.
Mm.
So the industry in China, it must serve as an economic engine, but at the same time, it must pose no threat to China's political stability or even actively serve political purposes. So most
Wow.
of us, like especially if you study internet culture in China, most of us have heard or perhaps still remember what US President Bill Clinton said about
Mm.
China's attempts to control the internet in, I don't know, early 2000s,
Mm.
sometimes around that time. And he said something along the lines of like, oh, good luck doing that. It's like
Mm.
nailing jello to the wall, right?
Mm.
But if we take a look at China's internet governance, it has been following a push and pull approach.
Mm.
So it's pushing the internet industry for maximized economic gain,
Mm.
while ensuring the cultural products meets the political and ideological requirements through really a multifaceted and really complex management mechanism.
Mm.
So then once we understand that, the influencer industry in China, then we can see it as it has experienced over a decade of push.
Mm.
If we take a look at the China's Blue Book series, which is like essentially the official industry reports on China's influencer industry or creative industry or internet industry, China's influencer industry has been in a pullback stage ever since late 2017. So the influencer industry is a form of media. First of all, we must establish this. In China, it is a form of media.
Mm.
It is relatively new with some interesting qualities, but it still is a form of media. So it must be conditioned by China's unique political economic context, and it must serve a particularly unique function to
Mm.
China's political and economic requirements. So I think that's essentially like why I've made that kind of argument. And yeah.
It's very interesting, especially when you said that these influencers have to sell their work for cheap.
Yeah.
But like for, I guess, most other social media influencers, they have the ability to charge very high prices in order to, work with companies, work with people, work with the government, etc. So it differs from there as well. And it seems that the influencers, they really have no choice but to make sure that they're in line with the political agenda of China, which it kind of seems, how can I say, less creative for the influencers, would you say?
Well, I think I do have 2 points to add to just in
Mm.
response to what you just said.
Mm.
Not all countries have 1.4 billion people.
Yes, that's true. I think you're the
And
only I think you're the only one, so
Oh, is India actually, yeah,
I think
catching up?
India is the biggest now, one of the biggest countries in the world, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So not every country has that kind of population, and not all countries have this level of, I don't want to use the word, but this kind of surplus labor, as in
Okay.
they have their traditional mode of production where they just grew crops on their inherited land, but then through several rounds of reform, they now are separated from their production tools, and they became the migrant workers. All that historical context that has
Mhm.
conditioned a lot of Chinese influencers. That's how I see it. But are there Chinese influencers who have the ability, potential, and I would even call it privilege to be
Mm.
creative? I think there definitely are. But
Okay.
if we look at the mass majority of the labor force, I think
Mm.
we must consider this context.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you for clearing that up. Now I want to look obviously more into the mukbang or the mukbang style of influencing. If people don't know, I'm sure if they're listening, they know, but I'll just remind you, it's kind of like eating for like a pub kind of social media eating, showing the public what you're eating, and usually the themes are either over the top where they're eating large amounts of things or something very delicious. I don't get it, but it is one of the biggest contents that are on social media platforms. So I must be the only one that doesn't understand it. But can you point out the differences between like the Chinese style mukbang and I guess I would say the rest of the world because I think just from my view, it all looks pretty similar. Now, there are a lot of this is what I'm kind of curious about now. There are a lot of viral videos making their way through Western side of social media
Yeah.
showing what many might say are inhumane when it comes to Chinese mukbang style. So, example, cooking things alive or
Yeah.
the style of food. But, it's not just China. We see a lot of it in like India as well as even in Korea. We've gotten a lot of stick because we kill the fish very when they're alive. We don't do it in, I guess, the humane way. In your journal, it cited eating streaming has been criticized as vulgar, wasteful, obscene, trash, and meaningless. And this is interesting because this comes from Chinese scholars. So,
Yeah.
is Western society also being culturally insensitive, or do you think this is a fair representation of what Chinese mukbang influencers are actually like?
Um, yeah, well, look, I think first of all, I would want to say that when it comes to food, a lot of
Mm,
times we think it's just eating and
mm,
just cultural practice.
mm,
But actually, there are a whole field of research where it connects food with identity, food with especially this kind of cultural us versus other.
mm,
So like to use one example to explain why I'm saying this and what exactly I'm saying.
mm,
So actually last year after one of my presentations, I was talking to a scholar
mm,
from he's from Torres Island.
mm,
Um, so he actually came up to me. He's like, "Oh, like that point you made about this transgression that a lot of mukbang influencers are doing. They're eating these food that are considered by not just the scholars but general society as disgusting." He's like, that for us, we eat turtles.
mm,
It's just what we eat. But in
mm,
Australia, we've always been laughed at
mm,
for eating turtles.
mm,
So, so I think there is one thing that, yes, there is a certain limit, as in what can we eat, how we eat,
mm,
in a socially acceptable way. But
mhm,
at the same time, I think we also must consider when this kind of judgment is made upon other cultures, there can be other like complex issues related
mm.
these judgments. So I think that's my first point. But then to get to the differences, though, I think a lot of your question are also wanting to know how Chinese mukbang is different really
Yes.
from that's in the rest of the world. So I think, like I said before, Mukbang was originated in Korea. It became a very popular cultural phenomenon. But in China, it has formed its own chain of production. So we have really commodified it really well. So so a lot of Mukbang influencers, well-known ones who have joined the game earlier, they have actually, in China, they have actually started to open their own food processing factories.
Wow.
So yeah, if they're not selling their own food, they sell this food they make in their own food factory. And a lot of these new and lower level influencers, as like they have less followers or like lower, less well known, they often become the retailers for these best known influencers and these food factory brands. So at like another really interesting observation I've made, like an interesting they have seen after 6-7 years just watching Mukbang change and develop in China is this kind of apprenticeship system developed within the dissemination stage in Chinese Mukbang. So what I mean is, if you watch Chinese Mukbang, especially when it's live streamed, you often see a key or lead Mukbang influencer who's doing all the yelling and shouting and promotion. And they have a group of apprentices, sometimes 4 or 5, sometimes even a group of like 10 or even more people who are doing the eating for them. So these well-known Mukbang influencers, they've made it by eating like 10 bowls of instant noodles in 20 seconds or something. Now they're having these so-called apprentices to eat for them. And with a group of people, they can eat more. These apprentices, they are not given the opportunities to talk, but they are just eat. They're to eat and to consume, where this lead influencer can just sell their product. So I think this is another sign that this industry has highly commodified, and it has developed these kind of really industry-specific systems that can, promote the monetizing value of eating labor.
I'm absolutely like shocked that that's how it works there in China. I mean, you could call it a great business tactic, but it also sounds very like just I don't
exploitative.
Yeah, that's exactly the word I wanted to use. But it's very funny that actually it's a great segue into our next question, because I did read up on your small study. I don't know if I'm going to pronounce her name right. Sijun.
Mijin, yes.
Ms. Eugene. Yeah. Okay, so and her rise to fame. Now, you said that she attracted like 1.7 million views, like basically overnight, when she ate those 10 bowls of ramen in 16 minutes and 20 seconds. Now, that's impressive, I got to admit, but the fact within months she turned into a retail brand. Now, you've just basically talked about how it's commodified. I mean, can you talk about the significance of her rise to fame and maybe how it changed like Chinese mukbang?
Yeah, I will talk about this question, but although I wouldn't say that her event is that key event that has changed Chinese mukbang, but I think she was at the so-called right time and doing the so-called right thing, although I really don't think that was the right thing to do. But who am I to say what's right or wrong? But yeah, you get what
what you're saying. Yeah.
So I think like if we talk about like her moment, that particular event, we have to talk about the live streaming history in China. So live streaming industry in China started in 2005. When we only had 2 live streaming platforms. One is EE, the other one is 9158, which is actually a copy of a Korean live streaming chat room. So during that decade between 2005 and 2015, China's live streaming industry is not how you see it today. It didn't really kick off like this. It didn't really caught attention, at least from like media, public, business, and regulators all alike, like we are seeing it today. So what China's live streaming industry didn't have for that decade was a way to monetize influencer labor. So it was around 2015 that more live streaming industries started to emerge in China. And when all of these live streaming industries had one goal in mind is how do we monetize influencer labor? And that's when Ms. Jin became famous. That's when she uploaded her video on social media platforms. So let's say that another mukbang influencer did push what she did today, like they're not even gonna get much attention, not attention, commercial opportunities. But when she uploaded it, it was a time that this was new, and these platforms and e-commerce and commercial brands, they are all looking for ways to exploit and make money from influencer labor. So I think like it's not that her event has changed mukbang industry in China, but she was at the right time.
That's really fascinating because like we're talking about this rise to fame with all these influencers. And one thing I have to say, what I was impressed by, but I've just never seen it, is I don't see the same level of exposure that mukbang influencers get here. Like there are maybe a handful that make it onto mainstream TV, but as far as advertising, as far as running their own, factories, as far as having their face on, a lot of food, and again, this apprenticeship system, it just doesn't exist here in South Korea that I know of. Do you think like the Chinese mukbang influencers, just the influencers in general, will be the new major celebrities? Do you think like the influencer of this mukbang influence penetrating the younger generations to follow in their footsteps? I mean, I was shocked. I used to teach kids, and I was shocked the amount of kids who say, I want to be a YouTuber. I want to do like, it was very different from my generation where it was like a police officer, a lawyer, a doctor, etc. But now all these kids, they want to do, they want to be gaming influencers. They want to be mukbang influencers. How do you think this is actually going to change like China for the younger generations? And do you think mukbang influencers are the new celebrities of today?
Yeah, definitely. They definitely are the new celebrities of today. Like, I think just last year, there was an incident where like the traditional or mainstream celebrity, if you want to call it a movie star, actually she went on this live streaming session to joint live stream with one of the famous mukbang influencers called Mo Mei Mei. So what happened was this movie star, she actually lost it
Oh,
emotionally,
really?
because like it's really demanding. You have to be promoting and yelling and screaming the whole time during your live streaming, and their live streaming session lasted more than 3-4 hours, and then she was just exhausted.
Sounds
So she
exhausting.
became like, sorry.
Sounds exhausting.
Yeah, it is. And then she just became like agitated, snarky, and then she like eventually pretty much just had a meltdown. What happened? So this is not the interesting point. What happened after was the interesting point. So this mukbang influencer Mo Mei Mei, she actually did everything she could to disassociate herself from this more famous or more mainstream, more traditional movie star. So
Wow.
she was like, oh, that has nothing to do with me. Please, my followers, understand this. It was her own choice, her own behavior. So like, it's really not that these mukbang influencers are going to rise into that status. I think we're already starting to see that, at least in some context, like these mukbang influencers present their own monetary value.
That's well, like I said, it's just amazing how like there are well-known mukbang influencers around the world, but I could probably only name like maybe 3 or 4, just who have that global reach. We have like a really famous mukbang female here called Henning, and she's on like mainstream TV as well. But
Right.
you might see her on some like labels or food or whatever. She's done that promotion before, but not to the level of like she's this. She is actually kind of turned into a celebrity. She hangs out with all the K-pop artists and all the
Right.
movie stars and everything, but not to the extent that this Chinese mukbang influencers are getting, in my opinion. Now,
Yeah.
mukbang is like it can be seen as harmless content, but I can kind of see it as more of a harmful content, in my opinion. I want to talk about Chinese censorship as well, and as the eating disorders related issues affecting this
Right.
industry. Is it these types of criticisms alone that causes censorship of mukbang content in China?
Well, if you're asking whether this alone,
Mm,
I think my answer is a straight no,
mm,
absolutely no. Um, Instead, I think I'm more inclined to view these criticisms, whether they are from scholars or from the general public or media outlet, as already serving a particular political ideological function.
okay.
Um, so I think this is not even a phenomena that's unique to mukbang per se. So
Mm,
I talked a little bit about this in question, I don't know,
mhm,
two or three. The internet in China, it must serve as an economic engine without creating too much disturbances, so to say, to the
mm,
socialist culture, the clean and proper image of a socialist culture.
okay.
So this is not even my own personal observation. This is defined in China's regulatory policies regarding the internet and cultural industry.
Mm,
But like, this is my observation. This is my argument, though.
mm,
I think for this kind of hyper exploitative and hyper productive reproductivity, this kind of production, for it to go on without producing some kind of waste, trash, or unwanted side effects or
mm,
byproducts, I don't think that's even possible. So,
mm,
like all these years that I'm watching, observing, studying mukbang phenomena and reading other people's writing and comments on mukbang, I don't see people talking enough about where are all these food go. I
mm,
mean, if you just consume like that, what are they turning into?
yeah.
The issue here is with this kind of condemnation of this sector as this kind of like they are to act as if they are vulgar, they are the waste, they are the products, byproduct, they are the trash. It's already some kind of like repression in a way
Mm,
to fortify like this clean and proper image of some sort. So I think at large, though, like censorship's role, like I'm not talking about China censors,
mm,
every country censors,
mm,
but I think the censorship's role is to cut and foreclose the possibility of recognizing the waste and unwanted product from the symbolic order. So, and built on that, what's even more important is with this kind of repression, there will always be the return of the repression.
mm,
So based on this understanding, that's when I believe that mukbang influencers' performances, they are not really just the thing that's the crime, the condemnable. They are the symptoms of
mm,
a much, much larger political, economic, social context, social condition.
mm,
And I think banning and censoring mukbang influencers or any other influencers one by one can
mm.
hardly touch on the cause of such symptoms.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
I'm sort of curious. Do you still find entertainment in mukbang yourself, or is it just simply just something you study now?
I don't think I ever found entertainment in mukbang.
Oh,
What I
wow.
usually say is when I watch mukbang, I'm not really entertained. I'm mostly just hungry.
Oh, really? That's what usually people are saying, like the reasons why they do watch it. There was a survey that was done in Korea, and a lot of the reasons why people watched it was the feeling of
Yes,
loneliness, trying
yes.
to suppress their need for food by kind of challenging themselves
Right.
to go through it and watch it. Yeah, like you, I've never really sat down and watched a full live stream of mukbang. I've taken part in them, and I've seen the odd video once or twice, but yeah, it's a very fascinating, I guess, topic of like how well the industry is going for mukbang. And like I thought it would die out, sort of like
Ah,
we to be honest with you, like the ASMR thing, I don't know if it is big anymore because you know how it really blew up, I think, was it like 2018, 2019? It was
yeah, yeah,
really, really big. And it
yeah.
kind of died down and like I thought, oh, mukbang is probably going to do the same, but it just seems to keep going and no one's really slowing down.
Yeah,
So,
if you can't find a viable way to monetize ASMR,
mm,
how long that popularity and trend can hold it up. But
mm.
if, like in China, you can actually commodify this well, I can't see a reason why this will go away.
Do you think it's a positive thing that they're able to commodify off this and make so much money of it? Or do you think it's, like you said, exploitation in a way?
Oh, um, oh, that's such a complicated question. Like, as soon as it relates to right or wrong, positive or negative, I'm just like, oh. I do, like I said, I
Mm,
think my opinion is quite strong on
yeah,
this. It's highly exploitative, this industry. And a lot of these people in it, they're in it for livelihood. They're
yeah.
exploiting themselves too.
As I said, I was shocked to find out just how much money people are making from it, and like they've
I
turned it into a business, which is I can't be negative about that because they've found a way to turn something that was very small
yes,
that they started into a huge business. The apprentice situation, though, I think is a bit
right,
odd in my opinion. uh but either way, I think I don't know if it could work in Korea. I don't know if it would be able to work in Korea, given that we're a bit more free with the content, I think, that happens over here in South Korea. But other than
right.
that, I mean, it was a very fascinating talk today, Sophia. You've opened my eyes so much to what happens, not
Oh,
just
thank you.
like in the mukbang industry, but specifically in the country of China. Now, before we go, is there anything that you'd like to promote, like future studies or your current works, or anything that you would like to talk about?
Um, no, I think currently I'm moving a little bit away from mukbang research, actually, doing more into no, I definitely think there's more to go.
Mm,
Yeah, moving more into just one home study in general.
okay.
So yeah.
Well, hopefully we can get you back on in the future to talk about maybe the next project that you're working on and maybe talking about that more. But
Right.
thank you so much again for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And yes, I hope to have you back on soon.
Thank you for having me. Talk to you
Yes.
soon.
So talk to you soon. So thank you for everyone for listening to today's episode from the IERLab podcast. Once again, thank you to our today's guest, Sophia. And until next time, this has been Walter Lee. You may click on your next adventure now.